You're listening to the Business Wealth Impact Podcast, your source for empowering information and cutting-edge ideas from the world's top minds. I'm your host, Jeanne Amlour, founder of seven-figure coaching company, Jeanne Amlour International. Join me on a journey to unleash your potential and create your highest success. Welcome to Business Wealth Impact. Hello and welcome to the podcast and welcome to our wonderful guest, Jim Britt. Jim is an award-winning author of 15 number one international best-selling books, including Rings of Truth, Unleashing Your Authentic Power, The Power of Letting Go, and Cracking the Rich Code series. He's internationally recognized as a business and life strategist and highly sought after as a keynote speaker. He was recently named one of the world's top 50 speakers and top 20 success coaches, and has worked with huge names like Tony Robbins, Jim Rohn, Mark Victor Hansen, and many others. Welcome, Jim.
Oh, thanks, Jeannie. Thanks for having me.
Yes, it's beautiful to have you. I thought that we could get started with, asking you, how did you get started in the whole speaking and everything that you're doing? What's your story?
Well, it wasn't something I planned for sure. I was kind of forced into it in a way. I know my first business venture way back when I was a youngster, like probably in close to mid 70s, I guess. I joined up in a direct sales company, which was my first business venture. And what really came out of there is Jim Rohn was the trainer in that company. And nobody knew who he was outside the company. And then we became best of friends. And later that company closed down. And a few years after that, Jim and I connected up, created a business together. And my job really was promoting him. And we did this for about 8 years. And I did such a good job of promoting him, which I really knew nothing about. I just launched into it because I loved his style, his message, and all of that. And by the end of the first year, I had opened multiple offices across California. We had about 300 full-time salespeople on the street selling tickets to Jim's seminars. And basically, he really couldn't keep up with the volume of business and the different things that we had added along the way, other workshops and things. So kind of forced me into speaking.
Wow.
And certainly wasn't something that I aspired to be. I just evolved into it. And so it took me a year or so to get semi-comfortable with it. I think my first 6 months, I was probably terrified of getting on stage, but I did it anyway, and it got easier and easier and easier. But that's how I got into the business.
Okay, so you had that happy accident of falling into something, which everybody wants. So many of the people listening are probably a little jealous right now. Like, that's great. I'd love to fall into something. However, it's not like you just fell into it and you didn't do the work and it just was magic fairy dust. So what are some things that you could share with us that working with Jim that you learned about, like mindset?
Well, back then, Jim didn't talk much about mindset. In fact, I don't think it was a word even used back then. But I think I learned more from myself and my experiences and my reading and the things that I did myself. And I just kept observing myself as I would do things and ask myself, how did I do it? How could I have done it better? So every time I got on stage, I would go, how did I do it? How could I have done it better? And you always come up with something you could improve. And I still do that today. How did I do it? How could I have done it better? So I learned a lot of things though from Jim, but we were best of friends, and of course he was brilliant with his style and his content and his message, and I learned a lot from that. But then at one point I wanted to take it to another level, and that's why I continued in the business. And as far as falling into something, I'm not one to plan ahead. I don't set goals. I don't write things down. Once I decide to do something, I remember it, so I don't have to write it down or put it on a vision board or anything like that, which is fine if somebody does, but it's just not me. So I take it a day at a time. I know where I'm going. I have multiple projects that I work on, and I just, dig in every day and work on those projects. People say, well, when's your next book coming out? I'm going, I have no idea. I'm working on it though. And when it comes out, it comes out. But when I get into something and decide to do it, I'm on it. So it'll probably come out much sooner than later.
Okay, that's something I've never heard before. That is fascinating. That you don't write your goals down, you don't do the vision board, and not everybody does that. But there's such a dialogue about that now that you must write your goals down and you should really do a vision board. So that's fascinating to me that you've never done that. So basically, your mindset, and I think that's also fascinating, we didn't use that word then, but your mindset is that you know what you're doing. You don't need to write it down because you just remember it and just do one thing at a time.
Well, I don't do one thing at a time. I focus on one thing at a time when I'm doing it, but I also have multiple projects that I'm working on. So I just look at each day which one I need to work on that day to move forward. I look at priorities. I just look at the list I have to work on. Go, okay, this one's the one I'm working on today, or maybe two or three of them on today. But I just never found it of value to write down goals for me. And I think some people miss what they really need to accomplish their goal. To me, a goal is an incremental step to getting to the decision that you've made. So the decision is the foundation. And a lot of people, I think, if a decision was a complete circle, a lot of people leave a little bit of opening in there, just in case. It's their excuse. It's their escape route. So uh, So a firm decision that nothing less than that will do is what's going to take you forward. And then your goals become the incremental steps in getting there.
Okay,
That's my
that's
philosophy.
amazing. So you just broke down how you get to your goals, which is you make a decision. You don't leave a little part of that circle open to squeeze out and make an excuse. I love the way you explained that because it seemed like you were saying, like, don't leave an open loop, close the loop. I've made a resolution, a decision. This is what I'm doing, and I'm just going to do it. Therefore, you just take one step after the other towards that goal, right? Because it is a goal. But you don't have any need to write it down because you're not going to forget that goal, right?
Sorry, when I first started in business, it taught me something. My first year, they told me that I was in a direct sales company, and they said, your job is talking to people. They said, if you talk a little, you'll earn a little. If you talk a lot, you'll earn a lot. I said, how much is a lot? And they said, 10 a day. Said, okay. And we didn't have internet and all that stuff. So I went out physically and talked to 10 people every day for a year, and I made one sale. One sale. So I got rejected over 3,650 times. That one sale over the next year made me almost a $500,000 with another opportunity that was presented to me. Plus, somebody came by 3 days after I was standing in my kitchen with 15 cents in my pocket and no place to go, and my home had been foreclosed. But the one thing that I had is I had the decision that I made in the beginning that I was going to get wealthy, whatever that meant. I didn't know what that was. And somebody came by and shared some ideas about the direct sales company and what I needed to be doing and what I was doing wrong. And that business earned me a $500,000 the second year. So I went from 15 cents in my pocket, a full year of losing everything except my decision. And the second year, I earned my first $1 million.
Wow. Okay. So let's just break that down. First of all, what I hear is you did the reps no matter what. You did your reps of 10
Yep.
per day and the whole year. So you did not give up. A lot of what you're talking about is actually grit, because when you practice grit, you look at what's not working and you analyze it, then you do it again. That's part of the whole grit practice, right? So you're actually practicing grit.
Mm-hmm.
And also, you didn't give up like most people would be like, okay, I'm on day 300 and I haven't gotten I don't know when you got that client, where it was in the 365, but you kept going. So I hear what you're saying is you just, there was just this decision, I'm going to keep going and there's no doubt to just keep going. And then you got to 15 cents. Now that's compelling. That's rags to riches. And your house is being foreclosed. But because you did the reps, because of that, the fruits of that labor then got you that job that made you $500,000, you're saying? Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
That's a big lesson, because what I'm hearing from that is
A
don't give
huge
up.
lesson. I look back on it all the time, and sometimes I wonder, why did I stick around for a year? But you know what? I worked in a factory on an assembly line. I quit my job the first day that I went into the direct sales company. I don't even remember how I survived that year. I sold things. I sold a bicycle. I sold a motorcycle. I sold a pickup that I had. I sold things to survive, but I didn't sell anything except one client. And so I just wouldn't give up because I saw other people doing it. I didn't know what I was doing wrong. And a mentor, spent 2 hours with me. I never saw him again. And he taught me what I was doing wrong, and my business took off like a rocket.
Okay.
But what I learned from that, I mean, people ask me today, how do you handle rejection? I'm going, I did that, many, many years ago.
Mm.
I did it 3,650 times. How about you? Did you do it 3 times or what?
Right, which is a
You
problem.
just move
It's a
on.
problem. People
Yeah.
are so sensitive about being rejected that I think that there's this idea we do something once, and if they say no, oh poor me, it didn't work. But what you're teaching us here, and I am so glad you shared all of this, because this is so important that people hear about doing the reps no matter what, and not placing all of their hopes on one thing. And it really is about persistence and consistency, really. So,
It definitely is.
yes.
And I didn't know what I was doing. They told me to talk to people, and I was just out talking to people. I didn't know I needed to ask questions or find out what their needs were or anything like that. I was just out talking to people about my business, my product. But nobody was interested because I didn't get them interested.
Right. You didn't know how to position it. And it sounds like you finally got some coaching, which people were not big on then. It's too bad you didn't get that
Yeah, I
coaching a
mean,
little earlier.
all of I'll never forget the fellow that knocked on my door from the company, and he wanted to come in and talk. He said, I understand you're a hard worker, but you're not making any money. He said, can we talk? Well, all of my furniture had been repoed, my cars had been repoed, all of that. And so we sat in my floor for 2 hours, and he shared with me and asked me questions and taught me what I was doing wrong and what I needed to be doing. And it made so much sense. And it was so simple, so simple. He asked me, he said, how do you know if you have a viable prospect? And I said, I guess if they buy from you. And he said, no. He said, how do you know if there's even a possibility of buying from you? And I said, I don't know. And he said, that's obvious. And he says, you have to arrive at 3 destinations in order to have a prospect. Number one, do they have a pain or a problem? Number two, do they want to solve it? And number three, can you solve it? And if all three of those are in alignment, you've got a prospect. But he said, you can't go out there flapping your jaws like you've been doing for the last year. He said, you got to ask questions and find out if they're a viable prospect. And I said, well, what kind of questions? He said, it doesn't matter what the questions are. I said, what do you mean? He said, you got to start a conversation. He said, if you say hi to somebody, what do you think they're going to respond back with? I said, probably a hi or a hello. He said, that ends the conversation. He said, if you say, hi, how are you? What are they going to respond back? I'm fine. Thanks for asking. How are you? Now you got a conversation going. You say, hey, you're at a wedding. Are you here as a guest of the bride or the groom? And how did you meet that person? How do you know them? Pretty soon, what kind of work you're doing. I mean, you just talk to people and ask questions and listen, and people will share their problems with you
That is so
as long as you're interested.
that is so fascinating that I agree with that. The hi, how are you? A human being is going to answer you. I'm fine. How are you? Now you have a
Yeah,
conversation. There's a dialogue. But if it's hi, hi, we're done. That's fascinating. And actually, I teach that we have to ask a question. Okay, so that was basically sales 101 you just taught people. I'm glad that guy got a hold of you
exactly.
sooner than later, because you still had a floor to sit on at that point. Okay, so let's fast forward. You made $1 million. So tell me, what is it that you're focusing on right now in your business?
Primarily, what I discovered about 35 years ago is that the reason they don't follow through, I would say 80% of people don't follow through with what they say they're going to
Hmm.
do, that old 80-20
Mm-hmm.
rule. And the reason is because over time, we've been programmed by well intended people for the most part. Um, and those programs become habit patterns to us. Like walking and talking and learning your ABCs and eventually reading and, learning how to swim or drive a car or ride a bicycle. All of those things become habit patterns that are second nature. And we don't have to think about them to do them. We don't go out to the pool and say, well, I wonder if I can still swim. We just jump in. We know we can. We don't put our pants on in the morning and ask ourselves which leg goes in
Mm.
first. We always put the same one in first. So it'd be hard to live our lives without those habit patterns. But the problem is we have not only the positive ones, but we've had the negative ones. We don't want to feel those, so we suppress them. And they become habit patterns that becomes second nature to us, and we don't know we're doing them. So we have a core belief that we've developed about ourselves that acts like an anchor that keeps us stuck. We become aware that we have the problem, maybe that we're in our fifth abusive relationship, or we've struggled financially all our lives, or whatever. We've become aware of the problem and we seek out solutions, but what we don't look for is the solution inside us. And that's that core belief about ourselves that becomes a blind spot. We don't know we have it.
Mm.
And so I really focus on helping people to really look at what that core belief is and how to take the emotional attachment away from it, because that's how we remember our lives. We remember the highlights and the good things, but the negative things we don't want to remember, so we learn to suppress those. And that's what drives us. What we believe about ourselves is what is reality today,
Right. So you're right.
like it or
What you're
not.
saying is what psychocybernetics says, and Think and Grow Rich and Joe Dispenza, that we are driven by our subconscious, that we've pushed down, but it's become a habit with the synapses going over and over and over again, doing the same things over. And so that's what you're helping people with in your coaching.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yes,
And
yes, that's really what I focus on. To me, that's the only thing that matters. You can go to all the seminars in the world, but if you're in that 80% bracket that doesn't follow through, and you're still unsatisfied with what you've accomplished, then they need to take a look at that, because that's the
really,
anchor.
it's really about changing our subconscious and our desires that we're suppressing, right? And also changing those
Right.
habits from a deep level. Is that what you're saying? Right.
Yes,
Okay. So
absolutely.
tell me about some success that you had with somebody that had a very deep rooted subconscious belief about themselves that was holding them back, and what happened after they worked with you. I'm fascinated to hear.
I'm always reminded of one, and I don't share this very often, but this was a few years back, and a woman entered one of my events, and she was the last person in the door. I was already up front. I was looking at some papers and checking the microphone and things, and I saw her come in, and she looked like she was about 5 foot tall, maybe even shorter, but she barely made it through the door, and she walked with a cane. She came up on the front row and sat down. And and so when we started, I went around the room and I said, why are you here? And why are you here? And what do you want to accomplish? And kind of getting to know the crowd. And I come to her and I said, what brings you here? She said, I have no idea. I'm going, well, what, you just wandering off the street or what? And she said, no, no, my best friend told me I needed to come to this event. So I bought a ticket and here I am. I said, okay, well, maybe we'll help you figure it out a little later. And so later, I'm working with different people, and I look over at her after I finished working with somebody, and she's kind of raised her hand a little bit, and she said, "I think I know why I'm here." And I said, "Okay, why?" She said, "I want to lose 180 pounds." I said, "Well, we're not a weight loss event, but I said, well, we'll see what we can do to help you." I says, "Are you open to a little exercise?" And she said, yeah, and this one just came to me. I hadn't done it before. But first, I said, let me ask you a few questions. First, I said, do you really want to lose that weight? And she said, I think so. I said, no, it's a yes or a no. And she finally said yes. And I said, are you willing to let that weight go? And again, she said, I think so. And I said, it's a yes or a no. And then the last question was, when? And she said, well, I think the correct answer is now. I said, okay, let's do a little exercise. So I took a flip chart, I drew a line down the middle. On the left side, I wrote benefits for keeping the weight on. On the right side, I wrote benefits for taking it off. And so I started with the benefits for taking it off. And she said, I'd feel better. Give me a benefit for keeping it on. Can't think of anything. Long story short, we went back and forth for 6.5 pages on the flip chart, probably at least 60, 70 different times. And every time was, I can't think of any benefit for keeping it on. And finally, I said, give me a benefit for taking it off. She said, I can't think of anything else. I said, no problem. I said, give me a benefit for keeping it on. And she hesitated. And I knew she was about to come up with something. And she said, finally, she looked up at me and she said, I wouldn't have to have men touching me. I said, oh. I said, why is that? She said, I've never shared this with anybody. And I'm guessing she was probably 50 years old. She said, when I was 13, she said, I was walking home. I was a cheerleader. She said, I was walking home from a football game one night and I got gang raped by 3 of the football players. And she said, I went home that night. I never told my parents. You're the first person to ever hear this. She said, I had decided that if I could eat and get fat, that I wouldn't be appealing to a man. And so she said, I just said, I never want to let a man touch me again. So I just kept eating and eating. And she said, I've been on 30, 40 different weight loss programs and I'll lose 5 pounds and gain 10 back or whatever, it just never works. And I said, well, are you truly ready to get rid of this weight? And she said, yes. And so I took her back to the experience, had her close her eyes and went back to the experience. I said, I want you to relive it right here. And she did. And of course, within seconds, she broke down and really, really started sobbing on a very deep level. And I let her work through that. I took her back again and again and again. It got easier each time for her. And then at one point I said, I want you to go back and look for an object in your mind that you can move in your mind's eye and move it. And so she did. It was a sweater. And then I took her back 3 more times after that. And she said, the last time I said, so how do you feel now? And it went from, a deep, deep sob to I feel good. She said, I can't get in touch with any negative feelings. I feel good. I said, well, let's let go of that. And she said, oh, no, I don't want to let go of the good feeling. And I said, do you trust me? And she said, 100%. I said, then close your eyes, take a deep breath, and just send that good feeling to everybody in this room. And she did. And I said, what do you feel now? She said, I feel tingling all over. I said, okay, we'll leave it at the tingling. And she said, but what do I do now? And I said, don't do anything. Just go live your life. But I do want to exchange phone numbers with you. So we did exchange numbers. And she called me in 30 days. She said, I've lost 30 pounds in 30 days. And in just over 7 months, about 7.5 months, she lost 180 pounds with no dieting, simply because she let go of that belief she had about herself. And it's so critical.
Right, because we can't want two things at the same time that are in opposition in our brains, because the subconscious wins out every time. Wow, that's an incredible story.
And she sent me a picture of her. She sent me a picture of her after she lost all the weight. Beautiful, beautiful woman. And about a year after that, I got a card from her about her wedding.
Wow.
She got married.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. And then a couple of years after that, she's another card I got. She just a Christmas card, I think it was. Just, she's happy and joyful. And
it's completely changed her life. So that method that you did of revisiting, is there a certain methodology that you use?
Yes and no. I usually take the person individually, and kind of I get an
Mm,
intuitive feel for what that person may need. Some don't need as much as what I did with her, or the
mm-hmm,
same thing. I wanted her to see visually what she was hanging
mm,
on to by doing the benefit
mm-hmm.
for both. And you could do that with almost
Yes,
anything. What's your benefit for being broke?
yes, I do that. The
You
pros
know,
and the cons.
there's
Yeah,
always something. Why stay there if if there's
right.
not a benefit?
Except to
Um, so deep inside, there's something that's going on that stops people in many different areas of their
right. I think
life.
people are broke because it fulfills their idea of themselves of being a broke person. And that's a self-fulfilling destiny.
Sure.
I'm a broke person. This is who I am. It's their identity. And until
Hmm.
people say, well, I don't subscribe to that identity anymore, and why am I doing that? Then it can't change, I believe.
Yeah, I had a person I was talking to one day, a fellow that he said, I haven't been able to pay my bills on time or fully for 25 years. And I said, wow. I said, that's a long time. I said, why do you, I said, what have you tried to change it? And he said, well, I'm thinking about cutting my overhead so I can pay my bills on time. I said, well, that'll probably work for a month or two. But I said, you're going to be right back not paying your bills on time. I said, because you're addicted to that belief that you can't pay your bills on time. And I said, if you don't find somebody, either do it yourself or find somebody like me or somebody else that can do it to help you break that cycle, I said, you'll live out the rest of your life not being able to pay your
Mm,
bills on time. I said, it's just
right. No,
reality.
that's true.
You know?
It's really what we say we are. If we
Sad,
say
but
I'm
true.
a late person, then we're going to be a late person. People pride themselves. Some people pride themselves on being late. Like that's just who I am. I'm like, "Oh, there is nothing good about that." Like,
You know what? The reason for that is it's a need
mhm,
for attention.
right,
It's a need for
right.
approval. And the need for approval and the need to be in control governs pretty much all of our activities in
Mm,
life. And I mean, when you really look at it, if you've got a problem of any kind, I don't care if it's a messy office or being late or whatever it is, there's always an underlying need for either approval or control. And the person that acts it out in control really, on a deep seated level, looks for
mm,
approval. But when you look at relationships, the conflict, let's say abusive relationship, there's always a controller and a person seeking
mhm,
approval. They're a perfect match. The one that needs approval doesn't mind getting beat up just to get
mm,
attention. The one in control needs somebody to beat up so that they can feel like they fulfilled their destiny of being in control of
mm,
their life. And the reality is, if I've helped hundreds of primarily women get out of abusive relationships simply by letting go of their need for
mm,
approval. And once that happens, your life changes because your mindset changes, who you see yourself as changes, and how other people see you
right,
changes. So that controller no longer sees you as a
right.
victim, and that person will
Yeah,
leave
just
or
naturally.
change. Most of the time, they
Right.
leave.
Well, Jim, this has been fascinating. What's one thing you would like to share with everybody before we wrap up?
I'll give you my favorite thing I like to share because it really helps everybody. I think if you get it, and it's pretty simple to get. It's a story about a friend of mine that called me one day, and we used to read the same books, and we would discuss what was in the books so that we could learn it on a deeper level and help one another. So he called me up one day, and we talked about this one book for a while, and just before we hang up, he said, Jim, he said, what do you think the word resourceful means? And I said, I have no idea. I guess maybe using your imagination or being more productive. He said, yeah, I guess. He said, it's just an interesting word. And I said, I guess so. And that was it. So later, when I'm driving home, I couldn't quit thinking about the word just over and over and over in my mind. And this has been, I don't know, 30 years ago or something. And so I get home and I open the dictionary. We had no internet. So open up the dictionary and look up the word resourceful. And it's defined as once again full of source. I thought, that's interesting, depending on what you think source is. And then I go look up the keyword source. And It's defined as where all things originate, not some things, but all things. I thought, wow, that's pretty powerful, depending on what you think source is. And I kept looking for another definition of source. I don't know why I was obsessed with it for like a year and a half or so. And I'd look in different dictionaries when I'd come into bookstores and libraries and look for origin of words and things like that. And I was in about a year and a half after that, I was in England at a small little village, and I see this sign that said antique bookstores. It was on the back door. And I walk in the back door because I'm always intrigued by old books. And the first thing I see is a dictionary about a foot thick. And it's all tattered, and I don't know when it was published. I wish I'd have looked, but it had a sign on it that said, "Do not open." And I thought that was for people in the UK, not for me. So I was prepared to buy it if I, I think anyway. So I opened it up carefully and looked up the word source and had some of the same things I'd seen before, but it had one that popped out on a page at me. It said source love.
Mm.
And I went, wow, once again, full of love. I said, that's powerful. And then I thought, well, how does that apply to your life and to business or, just where you are in life? And I thought, when we decide to do something, when we truly, truly decide to do something or have something or create something, we fall in love with it. We've got that passion for it. And that's that feeling that's connected. We fall in love where all things originate. And I thought, wow, that is so true. You get inspired by wanting to write a book or help somebody or do something in your life, buy a new car, whatever it is. You get inspired and you fall in love with it. Then I stop for a minute and I go, there's a flaw in that. I thought, if everything originates in love, I thought, where does fear come from?
Mm.
And I thought about that for maybe 5 minutes and I go, oh, we fall in love with fear. We create it as a project and we fall in love with it and live our lives as if it were true.
Mm.
And in reality, it's a made up story. We fall in love with our belief system. In reality, it's not true. It's a made up story. It's something you've decided is
Mm.
true. I'll never forget walking down the street in Toronto years back, and I was late for a meeting and walking. I'd just been out for a walk, and so I was walking really fast going back, and I'm 6'4" and long legs, and so I was picking up a pretty good gait. And all of a sudden, I feel somebody's presence right here on my shoulder. I mean, I could actually smell the
Mm.
guy. And I was just about to turn around and go, "Hey, buddy, back off just a little bit," because he was in step with
Mm-hmm.
me. And but just as I started to turn around, he said, "And God created man." And then another voice coming from him said, "I know that." And he said, "But then God created woman." He said, "Well, I know that
Mm-hmm.
too." He said, "Yeah, but then God created
Mm.
fruit." And he said, "Well, what does fruit have to do with anything?" He said, "Well, inside the fruit, there's a seed." And he said, "If you plant it, it will grow." And he said, "If you don't, it won't."
Mm.
So I took that as the decision you make. If you plant it, if you fall in love with it and plant it and nourish it and stay on track, keep the weeds out, keep the negativity out, and focus and create that mindset to move forward, it will become a reality.
Okay, that is it. That is great. I think that we should leave it on that note because we can't that, Jim. So I think that's the truth right there. And I love that story. And it goes back to what you were saying about
Thank
resolution.
you.
Okay, so this has been amazing. Thank you for coming on. We are going to put all the links of how people can reach you, but just so you can say it, how can people reach out to book you as a speaker, get you as a coach, be in one of your book compilations? What's the best place for people to reach out to you?
They can go to
Mm-hmm.
jimbritt.com. That's two T's, jimbritt.com. And they can go to
Mm-hmm.
becomeacoauthor.com.
Okay.
That's two. Or if people have problems with money and their relationship with money, go to
Okay, great. We
crackingtherichcode.com.
will get all of those links as well, and they'll be on the episode. Jim, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being our guest, and thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll see you on the next one. Take care. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Business Wealth Impact. I hope you found today's conversation insightful and life-changing. If you want to support the show and stay up to date with all of our latest episodes, the easiest way to do that is by following us on your favorite podcast platform. Just hit that follow button to never miss an episode. And if you really love the show and want to help us spread the word, leave us a review and share the podcast with your friends. Again, be sure to subscribe, and until next time, be impactful.